Hey, buddy. Here's a quick recap overview of Dark Age by Pierce Brown. Being book 5 overall out of 7, this picks up right where Iron Gold ended. Um, really has very good pacing and just jumps into it off the bat. So the entire part 1 is back to back viewpoints of Darrow and Lysander. They're both fighting on Mercury. Darrow had taken a stealth ship and he had snuck over to. He had stolen the Ash Lord shuttle, which is like a highly advanced stealth ship, and he had taken it to Mercury, where his entire army had been besieging the planet, had been occupying it, and they were surprise attacked by Atalantia's forces, who was the Ash Lord's daughter. She had done a sneak attack after luring away half the fleet to Earth, because they were afraid Darrow would pull a Caesar and take over the entire military, do a coup. So the fleet was withdrawn to Earth. Atalantia attacked the planet, came in from the sun side and into like the glare, wiped out the other half of the fleet. The entire army is besieged on these giant shields, and Orion, the big imperator, the admiral of the entire fleet, was captured. So Darrow does like a really cool mission to rescue her. He goes on, and everyone's like, "Oh, it's the Reaper!" Everyone's freaking out, and he's like fighting through the ship, and he's big and loud and fast. While his niece, Rona, yeah, Rona lands in like a mech ship to the other side, cuts through the hull, and just steals Orion out of the ship. And then she plants like a nuke. They blow up. Don't scratch the carpet, dude. Come on, come here. They blow a hole in the hull. They plant a nuke, blow up the other half of the ship, and they all make their getaway. So Darrow lands on Mercury and starts leading his army siege to defend it against everybody. So Atalantia is doing an iron rain. It's where they launch all the golds out the planet. They put them in like star shells, these big like mech suits, and they take like gun ports basically, just fire people at the planet. There's like thousands of them, so it's harder to defend against like anti-air and everything. And that's how they land on the planet instead of doing like shuttles and stuff that could be like shot down. So she's taken all her people, including Lysander and one of the Rim Moon delegates. He had two people. He had Romulus and he had Seraphina. And they're like, well, you have to prove yourself. You're a pixie. So Lysander says, I'll go. I'll fight in this rain for you, and then I'll prove myself as a real iron gold. And Seraphina goes as well, because she's just like really hot for battle, and she just wants to murder a bunch of people. So they all land. It's a bunch of chaos. They're going through all this anti-air and everything. It's Lysander's really first brush with war. So you have a lot of like really traumatic, like just he's completely overwhelmed and everything. So they land and they're about to besiege the planet. Meanwhile, Darrow has a couple tricks under his sleeves. His wife, as the new leader of the Republic, has all the old files that Octavia, the old empress, basically had, and part of her control over the planets. She fought with knowledge and pure ruthlessness. She had buried the planet shaping engines called the storm gods. These being things that affected the climate and the rotation of the planets and the storms that they use for terraforming. Instead of removing them, they were buried underneath the sand. Darrow knew where, and together with some of the engineers of the planet and some of the oranges and blues, they recover these things, they activate them, and they start them in secret. So they get a couple head start, and it looks like just like, oh, a little tropical storm coming up, and then it just keeps getting worse and worse. So Darrow's whole plan was to have like them funnel through, have one shield fail of this chain of cities that are all protected on these bubble shields. He arranged for one of them to be like slightly weaker, to lure them in, have it go down, and then it become like a big crossfire. His army is going to come in the rear under the storm cover that will prevent reinforcements, communication, like satellites, stuff like that. and that was his big defense plan. But they have the Fear Knight, which is Atlas Ar-Ra, who was from the Rim originally a Ra, but was kept as a hostage by Octavia and just kind of like, I don't know, kind of trained and raised as a sociopath from a child. And he has been, he launched in on one of these smaller Rim cities, smaller cities in the Shield Chain, attacked it, massacred all the people, put them on spikes and impaled them because that's the thing he does as the Fear Knight. He just he's trying to demoralize people into like getting their taste for war, and he mutilates and brutalates and impales people, and then he traps the remains. If you go to rescue them and give them medicine or food or water, you usually blow up. It's all like a trap. So it's Darrow's been fighting him, chasing for years. He's a real sadistic jerk about it. So he infiltrates one of the planets, one of the cities, and they found out there was a back door he used to deactivate the shields of several of the cities connected to it. So there was old protocols that were buried in there that he had lived on this planet and knew about, and Darrow didn't as one of the recent conquerors. So he was able to sabotage and take down this entire row. So Darrow's people were unprotected. They were all had to reorganize of where they go to evacuate into other shields that are not on the grid. Some of the last like two big cities. So his plan's a little thrown off. So he activates these big storm gods. It's wildly cool. Like, it's horribly tragic. But it decimates the second wave of all these ships that are coming in. All these now that they've done the Iron Rain, all the ship transports and tanks and big heavy armor that's being deployed and flown in are entirely just blown out of the sky, blown into each other's impalements, and it's like Twister on steroids. You have these giant like sand hurricanes, multiple of them, that really ruined and wrecked the first Legion that was already on the ground, the second Legion that was in the air, and the third Legion can't deploy and they're stuck in space. So Darrow takes a bunch of big mechs, Yagin snipers, Yagers? Yeah, the big robot mech suits. So, they're based on these big robot mechs, like giant city, like Godzilla size. Jaegers? Yeah. And he rides on them and his army across the desert in this storm to reinforce his city where all the people had to refuge his army when the shield chain fell. So, there's a really cool scene there that you have like Lysander he's going to try to take down the storm god, and because he also knows from his grandmother as being like the heir that the storm gods were there, so he's going to strike against the storm god, take it down, and he does, which is really cool. But then Darrow's army is like mechs are stomping through the sand, so he's like, I'm going to take down the Reaper, and it's like this entire chapter where he's like struggling and fighting, and he gets like boot stomped by Darrow and gets like half his face melted off and his like eyes like ruined. And then like Darrow, it's like Darrow's chapter, the next one, is like one sentence where he's like, yeah, I encountered light resistance from the remains of the storm god in this desert. It's just like Lysander's viewpoint is this huge epic battle to him, and for Darrow and his history of war, it's just like a footnote of like, oh yeah, there was like a handful of golds and a couple of grays I stomped through. I gotta get to my people really quick. Oh, I'm so worried about them. Which is a really fun narrative thing that the author did, Pierce Brown. So, Darrow makes it to the city. They're all hunkered in. That kind of ends part one. Lysander in the desert and Darrow getting to his city. So, we switch over to Virginia. Yeah. So Virginia, and it begins with a D. It's not Cavix. It's Cavix's son, one of the Telemonuses. Daxo. So Virginia and Daxo as the head politicos basically for the Golds on Luna. The Sovereign and her retinue, they're doing a big strategy of how to regain majority in the House and the votes they need. So they're doing a lot of political wheeling and dealing and finding information, and they figure out that who's been turned and who hasn't, and who's been bought by the society and who's been threatened and cajoled, threatened by the syndicate, which is, their mafia. So they find the Duke of Hands, they interrogate him, they figure out that he's been cavorting and fraternizing with Dancer, one of the senators. So they spring it on a Dancer and is like, hey, you've been lied to, manipulated by this guy who is like trying to blackmail you basically, or was about to, in your relationship for the syndicate, but we got him, you're good. So he gets really mad that he's been like manipulated and everything. So they think they got the votes they need to get the support in the Senate to send reinforcements, to send the Republic fleet to Mercury, rescue Darrow and his entire army. And they're in the middle of their like big hearing and their big meeting in the Senate. And then Dancer is like coughing up blood. All his supporters are like coughing up blood. They've been poisoned. And then like the shields go down and people have been excited to a riot. They blame Virginia because they were head to head and no one knows that they came to terms secretly, except for like one person who's this guy like leading like, Virginia did it. She's trying to overthrow. She's killing everyone. The Golds want to rule again. And there's like a riot and there's like a big mob and they storm all the cool people that we like in the Senate. Virginia and Daxo are just like kicking tail, but it's like them in like toga robes. Daxo picks up like a statue plinth or something and just like braining people with it. Virginia has like a belt that pulls into a sword and she's all like defending herself, but the mob overwhelms them and Daxo gets killed, and it's terrible because he was a super cool dude and he could have ruled a planet, but instead he was like serving as a senator because he wanted to support Virginia, and it's oh so tragic. So Virginia gets like captured, and then you realize like some of the Reds were actually Bone Riders. Like the Bone Riders are back, which you'll remember from book 1. That was her brother's gang. Like you have the Reapers, Wolves, and the Howlers, and you have the Bone Riders. So we figure out she gets captured and she's like being interrogated and tried for her crimes, which was a bunch of mocked up stuff. That her brother didn't think he was going to win the fight with the Sovereign, or he just had crazy contingency plans because he was a mad genius. So he had himself cloned, and not Lyrio. I don't know if we know the name. Yeah. Sorry, I don't think it's in here. Because it's a big twist. Oh, I should know this. Yeah, they didn't put it in here. I was like tipping people off, which was good. So, Lyra? No, what was her name? Anyway, her brother's head. Oh, that's gonna drive me nuts. Lilith, yeah. Lilith with the hell of the Bone Riders, like, she was obsessed with the Jackal, and so she carried him to pregnancy, a clone of the Jackal, and like raised him, and the Jackal left all these recordings and tapes of like everything you need to like be himself. Like, these are your key moments and your defining characteristics. And so he's, once he became like of age, of like intelligent, he started leading the coup, and taking over the mafia. So he's been directing things, plays behind the scenes, and some of these big attacks have been happening lately, and like the stuff with the Senate has been directed by him because he's still a genius. Clones him just a little crazier, and at all have a normal childhood. Not that the first Jackal did either. So Virginia is also crazy smart. She has some really great viewpoint chapters. So she starts manipulating her brother, and because she grew up with this psychopath as her twin the first time around. So she analyzes and knows what is different about him and how Lilith has been kind of like manipulating him to be like more amenable to her. And she sees the Bone Riders of like, they're great people. They're our glory days back in high school. Like, we were the best. And really, they're like psychopath morons that have been in solitary for 10 years and now are insane with like feasting and raping and going nuts. And so Virginia is kind of winning the affection of the Jackal's clone, this monster abomination, and be like, hey, they're actually idiots. You didn't like them the first time around. I'm really the only one that was on the equal playing field with you, that we have similar intelligence. So she's like intriguing him with puzzles that only two of them are really the smart enough to figure out. And she also has an edge because she solved these puzzles with him the first time. Like, she's done this. She did this with him when he was a kid, and now she's an adult and doing it the second time around. So she's kind of manipulating him with little hints of his past and stories he didn't know. Like, oh yeah, I have your old puzzles. And he sees his first self slash clone father, as this like god figure of this, with reverence. So anything she can tell about his past life, he's like, oh yeah, tell me more. So she lures him to her office, where she had security systems that were disabled, but she had some like special plants that when you handle them roughly, they have spikes in them, like poison spikes. So they were like not watered and mostly dying, but she finds a good one. She offers it to him, and he's just like this indoor kid, that hasn't been around like the real world at all, being super sheltered. And so he just grabs it as an entitled little indoor brat, and it kind of crumples it, and it spikes into him. And you can see all this poison, and he's like rolling around in pain. Then Virginia like throws it in his face. Fights Lilith, maybe kills her. I think just wounds her pretty badly. Is also barely wounded. Finds a secret, goes to her secret escape chute in the wall, shoots down, gets to like a quick medical center, patches herself up, and then she gets rocketed out. Nakamura, one of the Greys, rescues her, and she leads basically a strike team because they're still on the planet. They're out in space. Her fleet and everything was kind of like with the Republic. They were in like a standoff, so they're to swoop in, launch a strike team really quickly. They get Virginia out. They start flying to Mars. Everyone's just kind of evacuating. I was like, hey, well, we can't. Nothing else we can do. They lost the Senate. They lost the planet. They've lost this battle manipulations. They leave the Abomination clone there. I think he's going to lose his hand from the poison. They haven't shown it, but it'd be a very nice deja vu coincidence again, because that the first Jackal lost his hand in Darrow, and this is the clone of the Jackal, so they kind of keep that. There's a kind of a pattern there, which would be a kind of a cool payoff if we get to it. So they start going into Mars, retreating back to Mars, and they're going to regroup. Meanwhile, on Mars, we find out that Virginia's son and Severo's daughter that were kidnapped by the Mafia, and then they were rescued, and then they were rescued by the Grey Ephraim, and their ship was hijacked remotely, and Ephraim blew up the ship, and they crash landed. That's the last we saw of them. So a band of Obsidians found them and took them back to Mars secretly for Sephi, Ragnar's sister, who's been Queen Sephi, leading all the Obsidians. She pulled all the Obsidians back to Mars, and her plan is to take the mines. The mines were kind of stolen from the Reds by Quicksilver, the financial guy, and he's been staffing them with robots. And he's like, oh, well, you'll get some of the profits, but he worked the book, so there's no profits because we're pouring the money back into infrastructure, so they got screwed. So Sephi has a plan that Virginia knew about and was supported, that Sephi was going to take the mines with the Obsidians and have hire the Reds to work the mines again, and they live in the city because it's cold and they like it. It's dark, kind of like what they grew up in. So that's going to be her rebuilding these cities that were abandoned by Augustus and have a future for her people. And Virginia liked it because then they had an investment in the planet. When Mars gets attacked, like, hey, there's now millions of Obsidians that call Mars home, and they'll defend it as their homeland instead of just soldiers being sent out to die for someone else. So she's been she was going to barter the two kid hostages to Julii, Victor Julii, because one of her daughters is the other hostage, in exchange for ships and the support when she goes and takes over the mines. So part of her plan is, so she just is holding the kids, treating them well. She's really cool. She's actually a decent person. And she hires Ephraim to train her Valkyries, like some of her Obsidians. Like, they're the best warriors in the world, and all the worlds. But to train them how to, like, not just fight. Instead of, like, you need an objective, let's go through the front door, blow it up, fight everybody. So he starts training them, like, stealth and espionage and how to, like, hack. And he was the greatest thief that was ever on Luna. And so he starts training them, like, lockpicking and telling lies and just stuff like that, how to be, like, gray operatives instead of just soldiers. So he starts training them. You have some really cool moments with that. And then they lead a strike on the he plans the whole operation. So it's a real big, Sephi is trying to change she's a reformer, change the culture of the Obsidians. So not picking one of her own warlords to lead the battle, but instead choosing Ephraim of Grey to design their battle plan, and she's integrating, like, other colors, techs and pilots into their units. So she's being very progressive about it, which gets her some discontent. But she's doing some really good stuff. So Ephraim plans this huge coordinated, they take an entire continent, a coordinated strike on all the mines of this continent for Sephi. And it works out fantastic. The people pull it off. Ephraim accidentally takes some, like, wild obsidian hallucinogenics, charges into battle with, like, grab boots, like a robe, and a big weapon, which he's hallucinating. It's really just a mop. And the reason the automated turrets don't fire on him, because he's unarmed. He's not a combatant. They think he's like a janitor. He's a gray and he has a mop. He's not like a giant obsidian with a rifle or a sword or an axe or something wild. So he just runs past everybody, screaming, you know, high as a kite, screaming his head off, leads the charge, becomes like a mascot, and charges in the middle of all these, like, killer robots and then boom, Sephi and her warriors strike and wipe everything out. But it's really cool, really fun scenes in there. Some fantastic humor in this book. So, they win the mines, they're rebuilding the city, everything's going pretty well. The two kids, the hostages, are now, like, training with Obsidians every day. So Victor and Severo's daughter is just, like, having the time of her life. She's a little, you know, chaos demon, and she's running around fighting with Obsidians and learning swordsmanship and archery and, you know, really good military training for her. And Pax is talking to everyone, learning, strategizing, but he's soaking a bunch of stuff up. So it's a really cool growth moment for these two kids that are really growing up really quick, better or worse. They go on this big celebratory dragon hunt to celebrate their great victory. So they're all on, like, griffin backs, and they're, like, soaring through all these canyons, hunting, like, a big drake, like a big ice dragon, which, you know, was made by all the mad geneticist carvers to recreate legend of folk tales to inspire the Obsidians, but also just to have, like, fun things for them to hunt. Because these worlds are mad, and I love it. So they're all doing a big dragon fight, and Sephi goes for, like, the kill shot on her bow, but she, like, can't pull the bow back, and it's gonna, like, kill her. She's gonna die out there. So Ephraim, like, takes a rifle from one of the Obsidians and does this, like, crazy sniper shot to kill the dragon, which, again, is, like, treason. You're not supposed to kill these sacred ancient animals with, like, modern weapons, and it's poaching. But it's like, he did it to save the queen, So they're all cool. And so he's talking to the queen, and he figures out that she got poisoned by somebody. She's like losing like feeling in her arm, and so she's like kind of desperately trying to enact these change before she loses her power, and people figure out won't respect her as a leader, warrior queen. So it's really sad, tragic there. Um, they're having another like big feast night to celebrate this, and the leader of like it wasn't the Valkyrie, but the people he's been training, the Obsidians to be like stealth gray operatives, she gets brutally murdered, and they're like, "What happened?" And Ephraim sees like the biggest Obsidian ever. It's insane. So we started getting tales and stories of kind of sprinkled through very lightly that there was a bunch of Obsidians when the last great Obsidian revolt like 500 years ago. They all went to the outer rim, the asteroid, the Kuiper belt of the asteroids beyond the solar system, beyond Pluto. There's Obsidians that lived out there, and what happened was Octavia sent the Fear Knight out there to put down the Kuiper belt Obsidians, and he couldn't fight them. So instead, he infiltrated them. He sent Ragnar's father, who was like this great Colosseum stained, colossal, insane Obsidian, to basically fight his way up the hierarchy. And he united all the Kuiper tribes, and he's been kind of harassing the Outer Rim there. So now they're recalled back from the Rim along with the Fear Knight, and they attacked. Hey, buddy. They've been attacking ships. We kind of see them in a couple other scenes, but now he is there for the Obsidians, and so he kills or like blinds the priest guy, who was kind of influential to leading Sephi to reform, and he's manipulating things. So he kind of strolls into this grand headquarters, and he calls Sephi to a duel, and he's like, "You don't have a right to rule. Like, your mom was crazy, so what right to rule you have? You got from your father's side, from Ragnar. I'm Ragnar's dad, so I have a right to rule." They get to like a big fight. She's obviously like kind of paralyzed in the arm, and he's just a monstrosity. Octavia paid for him to have like rejuvenation therapy, so he's like 100 years old, like over 100. But he's had like crazy rejuvenation science to be younger, and he's got like metal plates embedded in his arm, and he has this like all the fighting he's done in the Outer Rim. He's got this like chain spear thing and these big like shoulder spikes. They've all been like trained to fight in zero G, out in space. Like some of his people, these Outer Rim Obsidians, they are impervious to a vacuum. Like they have like genetically made flaps that cover over their eyes and ears. Like extreme darkness and cold they can see in the dark. Like it's just like they're monsters. Hey buddy. So he basically kills the kills Sephi, the Queen of the Valkyrie, takes all the Obsidians, and gets them to leave. It's really tragic. Ephraim has a really great moment. So he realized who the traitor was that had been kind of betraying Sephi this whole time. Was this Logos white guy who's, again, been deep undercover by the core for years and years and years. And he's the one that brought back Ragnar's dad and as kind of manipulating things against Sephi. So Ephraim was able to get the kids out. He's kidnapped these kids a third time, got them away from Sephi, which was really cool. He returned them to Victra, kind of. So he kidnapped them again. He ran away with them. I skipped his whole story. I'm so sorry. He kidnapped them again. He got hints that Sephi was going to lose, and after, the priest, and he saw the big giant obsidian, so he kidnapped the kids a third time. He escaped with them. They were hiding out in the woods. Victra's ship was killed by Ragnar's dad, Elisa Obsidian. She was coming to buy the kids as part of the ransom, pay the ransom. They were attacked in space. Her entire flagship was destroyed by Ragnar and his crazy space obsidians. So they also kind of crash landed on Mars, out in the woods. You get this really cool scene with like Victra, and she's like 9 months pregnant, like overdue. She's being helped by Lyria, the Red, that we got from the last book, along with Volga, another Obsidian who was one of the two people that on Ephraim's crew that kidnapped the kids. So they had to work together to survive, and they're like sneaking through the woods trying to survive. Super heartbreaking. Victra gives birth to her son, her first son out of like 3 daughters. But then they get captured by the Red Hand, and her son gets murdered like at 9 days old. It's awful. And they get thrown into a Red Hand prison camp. And Lyria is the only one that escaped. She gets herself captured on purpose. She leads a revolt with all the other girls. They're making all these like red girls be wives for the Red Hand. All these like old soldier people. So all these like way too young girls are being forced to marry these creepy old dudes. And so she leads kind of a revolt with the girls. That she gives them these like tooth implants to like spit acid. So when they have the big marriage festival night and they all go to like marry up and go to like the bedchambers, they all like spit acid and like melt these dudes in half. She steals a gun. She goes, rescues Victra, who goes into full like mama bear murder mode, and she murders that entire like it's a mine. So you kind of saw from book 1 the entire tower of this mine. She murders every single like Red Hand dude in it. Lyria helps rescue Volga, who leads all the other Obsidian captives. So they lead a revolt. They massacre the Red Hand. They're escaping inside the mine, which was like the Red Hand fortress. Really badass scenes. Outside the mine, there's like the larger camp. And so now they're going to break in, and they have all their ships, and it's like the whole army. This is like one of the cool things Sephi was doing was hunting down the Red Hand, like the others, the silvers and golds weren't doing. And they were doing like reactionary, but she was sending Obsidian teams to actually like infiltrate and just massacre the Red Hand terrorists, which is really cool. But now they kind of all retreated and hold up in this one place. So their entire army is trying to get in. You see that the Red Hand leader was Harmony this whole time. And then we get throwbacks from book 1. She's always been like the mad terrorist, like, hey, everyone else, let's Darrow like overthrow for reform, like let's fix the problem, give voice and free all the people. She just wants the world to burn. She's that kind of revolutionary, and Lyria gets her vengeance because Harmony killed like her family. Her entire family. So she gets vengeance. Harmony, the leader of the Red Hand, is killed. You still have the army trying to break in. So, who's to the rescue? It's Pax, Electra, and Ephraim, and their ship that they had stolen and escaped from the Obsidians. They pick up the distress signal, they rebroadcast it, they send an army like the Reds, which again, the Red Hand were their own people, but they're really upset, like, hey, like, you're killing us, you're of us, we don't agree with your politics. So all these, like, militia of Reds, some of them unarmed, go to like rescue these people and stop the Red Hand. So Pax leads this like hodgepodge fleet. They like blow up a torch ship with like a big battle cruiser. Super cool scenes. So they're able to like rescue everyone. They get all together. Ephraim is able to return the kids to Victra. They're all safe and sound on Mars. He goes back to warn Sephi about the traitor. He figures that out. Gets killed. He blows himself up in like a suicide thing at the end. Takes down the white traitor. Wounds Ragnar's father. Like blows up off half his face. Like goes out with a bang. Super hardcore. Really tragic. Really cool moment there. And that's kind of his end of his story. Volga decides to go as a hostage back with her father, or to, I think she joins him. Is he had a like, hey, if you join me, you're my daughter. You're my daughter. Um, I'll just leave and I won't destroy everybody. So he wants his daughter. They go, and all the obsidians kind of disappear. Ephraim's dead. Um, Virginia and Victra, man, start training. Like they're really mad. They got to go rescue Darrow. Got to fight. The fight's coming to Mars. During this time, Earth and Luna have fallen to the society without their forces and them being there. They got overwhelmed by the rim coming from one side, the core coming from the other. Back to Darrow holding out on Mercury. He does like a last huzzah plan to. Oh, and when Luna fell and Virginia escaped, Severo was captured. Um, again by the society, super tragic. Darrow's doing a last huzzah on Mercury and holding out really well. They capture like Lysander gets captured by the Fear Knight, who figures out his identity. He allows him, Lysander to escape with Alexander and some of the other Golds that got captured to have a plan to infiltrate Heliopolis, the last big holdout city under the Shield Dome. So they're escaping under there with the captured Fear Knight. Orion went mad. She was captured and tortured by the Fear Knight, and she just wanted everyone to pay. So she was in charge of the Storm Giants instead of just providing like cloud cover and electrical interference. She started like terraforming the planet, and like there's been massive wind and rain and flooding, and so like lots of civilian casualties and death. This legions destroyed. So Darrow had to do like a kill switch on her to like terminate her connection to the machine when she was plugged into it to stop the damage. Everyone kind of retreated Heliopolis. Lysander comes up there with like a fake identity. Everyone believes that he's like legit because he was tortured by the Fear Knight too and was instrumental to their escape. So he's put under guard like in this big palace for one of the great engineer geniuses that helped them revitalize the Storm Giants. And Lysander goes to visit him with Lyria while they to thank him for the rescue and escape. And during that moment, like Lysander's, they figure out his identity. Darrow pieces it together, so he radios in, and then they kind of let on that they know, and they start kind of poking his buttons. And Lysander shoots Alexander in the head and executes him. He's like, "Hey, I know who you are. Let's duel honorably. We're both like the grandson of Lorne Arcos. Let's have a saber duel to the death." And Lysander, being a little twerp, is like, "Nah," and he just shoots him unarmed in the head. And Alexander is really a favorite of me and a lot of people. Way too young, super cool. And he like reins in Lyria, makes his escape. He starts leading a revolt of all the Mercurians that had been in captivity. He does like a prison break. So he starts leading a counter strike on Darrow. Darrow was trying to do an escape. He was building a giant EMP, and so to disable the ships in orbit, so they could fly out there and escape. And he was betrayed because Alexander convinced the architect Galastries, who was the super engineer, the big brain that helped them use the storm gods, but also build this giant EMP. And so Darrow's entire city is struck by EMP. The shield's down. Reinforcements are coming. You have this big fight led by Alexander and Darrow, and they have no electronics or anything like that. They're all like horseback. You have this big fight in the city. Darrow gets pretty wounded, but he's able to limp off. Most of his army is like routed, captured, killed. It's really tragic because Darrow, again, imprisoned people instead of executing them. Fed these like hostages and civilians and people of the city that they were occupying. He gave them radiation meds, like his soldiers, sacrificed and gave up. Like he was merciful and kind and caring to these people. And yeah, it's just a really kind of rough ending. There's several one-on-one moments with Lysander and Darrow. Darrow gets his his blade, his scythe. They don't call it a scythe. They call it sling blade. Shattered. But he limps off. He's able to make a retreat. He is rescued. This is right at the end. Really cool. By... Oh, come on. Sorry, there's so many names to keep track of. His buddy from, like, book 1. Are they even in the society? How are they even organized? Oh yeah, Cassius. It's not in here, but I got it. Sorry. So, Cassius was spared by Diomedes because he had fought honorably in the last book and was not being treated honorably. So they faked his death. He promised not to join the fight, lied, escaped, stole his own ship back, and flew to Mars, where Kavik sent him to rescue Darrow. So they put, like, stealth armor on a ship. He swooped in, managed to rescue Darrow at the last moment, like a handful of his, like, howlers and commanding army, like his inner circle, and like 12 of them were able to make it off planet. Lysander's like a big hero of the society. He marries Atalantia to cement the power and say, I don't want to rule, I want to support you as you ruling. He gets his peerless scar from Atalantia, so he's iron gold now. He meets Seraphina was killed during the big storm battle. She gets like shot in half by like a ship bolt. She gets like obliterated. One of the golds that was serving him as his like personal guard gets really wounded by Darrow and gets like wrecked. And so she's like in a sick bed. She's gonna recover, but then like she was poisoned by Darrow's blade, so she's not gonna recover. So she had got from the battle, like was in the hospital, but they're like she's not gonna make it. And so Lysander goes to see her, and we kind of infer that Darrow's never used poison. We never get that from his perspective. That's not his MO. And Lysander studied Darrow his entire life. So it was Atalantia that had poisoned this girl to keep her from, it was the Love Knight, from joining Lysander and being a strong ally. And Lysander like really cared for her. And so she confesses on her deathbed that Lysander's mother and father were killed by Octavia, so she could control Alexander, and her mom was like a big reformer, and I was like trying to, reform the government, which was exactly what Victoria? No. Virginia and Darrow have done. So Lysander's mother wanted to do that originally, so she was like killed and wiped off, and Octavia kind of manipulated Lysander's memories with this big machine chair to like make him forget about his mom entirely and these events that happened. So now he's like wanting to play a long game revenge against Atalantia, but like they're married and they're really close, so he's really walking this razor's edge here. He makes an alliance with Apollonius, who is the Minotaur, the Mad Minotaur, who Darrow freed in the last book, because he also wants revenge against Atalantia for betraying him and causing him to be in prison. So you get, this is the reason why everyone kind of hated the core golds originally, but all the politics and scheming and betraying, and they're power hungry. They're not trying to lead and serve people. They're just trying to get power, and they don't care who they step on. And they obviously treat it like this is how they treat the golds, their peers. They really treated the pinks and the reds and the slaves terribly, and this is kind of why people wanted to reform in the first place. So he forms a secret alliance with Apollonius, and that is in the book. I'm sorry, this was really long. A lot happens with the multi-character books, and it's a lot of fun. I really do recommend it and enjoy it. And I am sorry for this 45-minute video. Hopefully it was good information and you enjoyed the ride. Thanks for watching.